for joining for our show, Wiping Out the Norm. It is all about women who have supported other women and also themselves by overcoming all the gender biases that unfortunately still exists. And I'm so glad that you are one of the women in leadership positions in the PE and VC space, because we barely see a lot of women into that category. And I think people who are currently on the leadership position like you have the onus to bring up other younger generation of women to really increase the percentage of women in this field. So tell me how did your journey in finance and investing in particular begin?
So really happy to be here, first of all, and thank you. I think the work that you're doing is amazing, and it's very necessary, and it's amazing to see so many different role models showcased that maybe don't necessarily get that sort of
Spotlight.
that attention, that spotlight all the time. So that's really amazing. I started out my career at PwC, basically advising private equity and private equity owned companies for quite a while, and through that found my way into private equity, and worked for a software investor looking after their European portfolio. And I think much like you say, noticed on many occasions that there was a pretty non-diverse space. And so decided at some point that enough is enough, took my own money and started angel investing, because I thought, okay, maybe there's something I can do in actually supporting female entrepreneurs, building impact businesses and helping them, especially at the early stage where even a small ticket can go a really long way, to basically help the ecosystem and help bring some of this talent to the point where hopefully at some point they can get PE investment.
Yeah. Absolutely. And if you may, because I think biases can only be addressed when stories are shared and when women like yourself voice up and come up with your own stories, because there are so many people who are watching you as role models and they would really want to know how did you fight against these biases which still are around without us even knowing consciously. So have you ever faced any kind of biases up until now in your career, especially at a time when you were starting up?
A lot, yeah. And I think it's the same stories that we hear over and over again, that if you are a woman in a professional setting, you're probably there to, the assumption is you're probably there to take notes or to make the coffee or to, so there were lots of those. There were lots of situations where people questioned my expertise and what I could bring to the situation, even though I was clearly very qualified for what I was there to do. So I think there are a lot of very, very open and very clear examples, but then there is also a lot of the sort of under the surface, the implicit bias, the unconscious bias that we see everywhere. And I think it's quite a difficult balance to get between fighting against the bias and speaking out and shedding light on it, whilst not focusing on it too much, if that makes sense. Because if I got to the point at some point, maybe a year ago or so, where I was so fed up of being told that it's hard to do stuff as a woman, that it's hard to raise funds, it's hard to build a business, it's hard to raise a fund, that I was like, well, it's fine if that's your story. That can be your story, but I don't want it to be mine. I just want to raise a fund because I'm qualified, and I want to make these investments because I want to support other women and diverse founders who are qualified. So I think it's a difficult balance to get right between, shedding light and helping work through these biases, whilst at the same time not letting them hold you back.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there any particular instance, for example, that you like to describe, like a story which you still remember has been there in your mind that, oh my God, this is what people used to think, and this is how men particularly ask women to do a certain things out of just the unconscious gender bias? Because like you said about getting some things for the client as well, one of our speakers on the show told me that it was some 20-30 years back, she was actually asked to make coffee for a client, and her male colleague on the other hand, who had the same experience and was of her same age, was sitting with the client and discussing the work, and she was equally qualified like you are saying, but she was just asked to get coffee and not attend the meeting. So it is something that really needs to be spoken about. So is there any instance that you remember as such?
There are many, but I think the instances that I remember more are the examples where the male colleagues that I was in the room with actually spoke up for me. So I had a few instances where this was still relatively early on in my career, where I actually had a much senior colleague who knew that I'd been doing the work and had all of the insights. And we went to a meeting with our client, and he actually was the one who said, it shouldn't be me doing all the talking because Alina has done all the work. So why don't we let her talk us through this and lead us through the meeting? So I think it's those are the things that I maybe remember even more, where people actually stepped up, people in a position to speak up and change something did it. And I'm to this day grateful to this person in particular, but many more that have done similar things. And so I try to do the same thing as well when I'm, for example, in a meeting with several investors, or if it's a pitch event with a mixed group of angel investors, and questions get asked, and we all know that different questions get asked of female founders versus male founders. So more of the sort of risk management, risk averse questions for female founders. So actually giving female founders the chance to speak about their ambitions, to speak about the upside potential, to speak about all these positives. So it's I think this is one of the things that we can all do to some extent when we are in these rooms.
Yeah, that's such a interesting perspective, because it's also important to highlight how men have supported women, all throughout. Although there are good, bad, ugly, all sorts of people in the world, but there are also good people, and we need to talk about them. So I'm so glad that you got this perspective. In fact, I was speaking with Rumi from Origin 20. I don't know if you know her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, so she was also telling me that she used to face biases where someone would just snatch her credit, and now she has become a person where if both men and women are coming into a room, and if she's asking a question to a woman and the man takes it up and answers, she repeats her question again and says that, okay, I have directed it to this woman and I believe that she can answer it. So it's better if you take the next one.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I actually have flagged this in many discussions as well, because what happens is it's always you end up with always the same people speaking, right? And this goes for male female, it goes for extrovert introvert, it goes for many different types of sort of diversity, visible and invisible. And actually you lose ideas, you lose voices if you don't call people out on this kind of stuff. So I love this example.
Yeah, I know. That's so true. And sometimes unconsciously, we may also let that man speak. And we might not even know that how hurtful it can be to a woman, or even a man for that matter, if they are not given the spotlight for the ask a question that they were asked.
Yeah.
So I think it's up to us also on the other side of the table, who are in the positions of power, to have that consciousness that, okay, I need to really have this woman in a position of power for her to be able to speak up. Otherwise, it's the small action that counts. I mean, at the end of the day, and the small steps that matter.
And I think if it is situations that are recurring, right? If it's team meetings, if it's meetings with portfolio companies, with investors, things that happen several times, I think that also gives an amazing opportunity to actually prep with someone. So if someone, if you have, especially a more junior woman, that maybe she's not super comfortable speaking up in front of people that are twice her age and always do all of the talking, because the first few times it's going to be hard, right? Because it's sort of a change and a shift in how you have these conversations. So actually taking the time to do a bit of prep and to agree, how are we going to set this up? What are you going to say? What do you want to contribute? How can I help set you up for success in this situation? I think is also an amazing thing to do.
Yeah, that's so true. But tell me, how did you transition from PwC to Marlin Equity Partners? How did you decide to switch after almost working for 7 years in the same company?
It was a big shift, because it was my first job, my first ever job, and leaving it was difficult. But like I said, I've been doing work for private equity companies, so it was almost like the next logical step to actually
Yeah.
work for the private equity company, work with the portfolio companies as well, see how they develop and how they succeed over longer periods of time. Because obviously, if you are an advisor or consultant, you only ever see the project length of time, right? So it's the 3 months, the 6 months, the 12 months. Whereas if you're actually working with a portfolio of private equity companies, that's for several years probably.
Yeah.
So I think it was that, actually wanting to be closer to the companies, helping them succeed, also getting the insights into private equity and sort of demystifying that a little bit.
Yeah.
And the same now with my role at Impact Shakers. Actually, this has become even more hands-on in all of the decision making, the picking the businesses we support. So it sort of was more of a, let's say, a natural evolution. It wasn't that I had this plan, okay, in this year I'm going to do that, and then that year that's going to happen. So it was, just taking the opportunities as they came up.
Yeah, I think sometimes ignorance is also bliss, and you don't need to think too much. It's just that you have to immerse yourself in whatever is coming your way, and then it takes you like a river, in the right direction where you need to be.
Yeah, and I think that's easier said than done, right? Because it takes, ultimately, for that to happen, you need to put lots and lots of time and effort into building networks, into reaching out to people that you want to interact with, into like putting it out there in the world that this is what you're trying to do, or something that you're interested in something. So it's obviously not something that just magically happens. So it's basically saying yes to the opportunities when they come, but also seeking out the networks and the conversations that are the kind of networks you want to be in and the kind of conversations you want to have.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think most of the women lack, unfortunately, because their networks are a little bit smaller as compared to what men have. And I think that's why it's so important to have groups like Women in VC, and something what we're building to help women expand on their network capital, because at the end of the day, that is what is going to give you the exact capital in your bank account, your network.
Yeah.
So that is something very, very important. But tell me, which was the most exciting project that you worked on at Marlin? Because you said that you were working with a lot of portfolio companies. So if you could handpick one or two of them and tell us about it.
Really difficult to pick, because they were all very, very different and very exciting in their own ways. So it was sort of all of them were software companies, right? So it was an amazing insight for me to work firsthand with B2B SaaS companies, because obviously a lot of the economy is going that way. So to firsthand work with them, experience what works, what doesn't, how they grow, how to help them build a strategy, execute on that strategy, support the management teams. I think that was always the aspect of it that I liked the most.
Yeah,
I would have a very hard time picking a favorite.
Yeah, I'll actually make it easier for you. Why don't you tell me about the first company that you worked on when you joined Marlin, and the last one before you left?
Okay, fine. It's well, because it's always a portfolio, it's not that you work on one and then you move on. But let's start with the first one that I sort of started interacting with. It was a German company selling financial software, essentially. And they had, as so often is the case, gone through some management changes and were basically setting themselves up for a bit of modernization and growth. And so that was actually, it was nice, because I am German by birth. So I had a bit of both worlds, working with the company for a UK based team. And so we did a lot of work around sort of transforming the finance function, helping with the go-to-market, helping the business grow, and just establishing a business that is sort of that can grow and that is future-proof, and ultimately sold the company just before I left Marlin as well.
Wow. I mean, if you don't mind sharing, what was the value of the company when you all started working on it, and what was the value at the time it got sold?
I'm not sure I can.
Okay. Yeah, it's private equity anyway, so it can't be disclosed. Yeah, but when we meet in person, maybe then you can tell me in confidence, just for my knowledge.
Cheeky. But actually, yeah, and actually, maybe the other thing is, because for me, there is, beyond private equity, there was obviously a whole transition into impact, right? And becoming first an impact angel, and now an impact investor through the Impact Shakers Microfund and the VC fund that we're currently putting together, raising. And so I think that for me really was a bit of an awakening in that sense, because building software companies was great and was interesting and gave me a lot in terms of the experience. But actually going from that to now supporting diverse founders, building businesses that are solving our most pressing societal and planetary issues, that for me was it was liberating. It was a revelation that you could actually use business and entrepreneurship, and also investment by extension, as a force for good. So maybe that is, rather than my last company at Marlin, maybe this is the thing that actually, obviously, I started my angel investing in parallel and was sort of immersing myself into that world more and more and more, so that it gradually opened up this whole new set of opportunities in the impact space.
Right. But tell me one thing, for those who want to start angel investing and want to build on that network, from early on, how did you source deals initially? Because it's so difficult to find the right deals, the quality led deals, because there are dimes and dozens of deals in the market, just like ideas, but only 1% of them or lesser than that are actually good enough for you to invest into them. So how did you build that network for yourself of startups where you could actually bet your money on?
So my first angel investment wasn't even an investment in the traditional sense. There is an organization called Corrales, used to be CEO, that basically gives interest-free loans to female-led startups. And so the way it works is you make a contribution. At the time, it was £850. The money gets pooled, and then all of the contributors get to vote which 5 companies get this pot of money, and then the companies decide amongst themselves. 5 loans are written out that are repaid over 5 to 10 years with 0 interest. And it basically is this concept of radical generosity, which I think was a nice entrance. And for me, it almost took away the fear of having to invest something that needs a return, because the return was implicit in giving female entrepreneurs a chance to grow and scale their business, right? It wasn't about the money. It was about what I could do for these entrepreneurs, what I could do for the community. And through that, I started meeting people. And then I also joined a couple of angel syndicates, like the Green Angel Syndicate in the UK, that specifically invests in climate tech solutions, and Hermesa, which is a female-specific angel syndicate that starts with, or that allows you, because it's a syndicate, to write smaller tickets. So it was a very gradual way into this. And I think my biggest advice to anyone who's interested in becoming an angel investor is that it's that first euro or pound or dollar that is the most difficult. So it's finding a way to almost de-risk this from the financial perspective and start your journey. Because any angel investor that tells you that they can pick a winner is lying. There are so many things along the way that can happen, right? Yes, you get better at understanding which founders are probably more resilient, which businesses fit better into the market, which regulations will help which businesses succeed. So I think you do build up experience, but there are no guarantees, right? And I think this is also the beauty of impact investing, is that even if the financial returns, and don't get me wrong, the idea is to make financial returns with this, right? Because we're talking about markets like health tech, like silver tech, like femtech, billion-dollar markets, climate tech, that have the potential to really generate amazing returns. But even if it doesn't work out from an impact perspective, they will have generated impact along the way. You will have supported diverse founders in building a business and learning and growing. So it's almost sort of the downside protection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, but good you spoke about that. My question was in sync with this, that how do you really measure impact in a company? I know there are so many tools and measures to channelize that, okay, this company is creating impact in this particular way. But what is your measure at, Impact Shakers? How do you really know that, okay, this is our tool or a benchmark rather for a company to create an impact?
Yeah, I think, again, this depends on the size of company you invest in, right? Because especially at the early startup stage, a lot of it is intention because there isn't enough data to properly measure.
Yeah.
So we take a mixed approach. We have a tool called Vested Impact that does an
Okay.
impact assessment of companies against over 100 million data points from the OECD, UN, World Bank, etc., and then brings in 200 million more data points from academic papers and research that proves the impact links for the
Yes.
methodology. And so that gives you an impact score that basically is overall impact, indirect, and negative impact. So that's the sort of the qualitative side of things. And then we work a lot with the companies to think through the impact they are trying to create, what kind of North Star metrics they are working towards, what unintended consequences there might be. So it's a
Yes.
combination of the two. And I think for me as an individual investor, so as an angel, that was
Yeah.
obviously, it was a less sophisticated approach. And for me, it was actual solutions to problems, right? So if we're thinking, if you think, I don't know, a fashion company that plants trees, to me,
Hmm.
that isn't solving any problems. That's sort of putting a sticking plaster on something, right? So it is really looking for solutions to these big, hairy problems, and businesses that have it in their business model that as the business scales in terms of revenue, the impact also scales. And then for impact shakers, we've developed a methodology that's a bit more sophisticated with the tool and the impact management project and some other aspects.
Yeah, that's true. But tell me one thing, that why don't we see enough businesses like women in VC, which are communities, but can be scaled up into maybe a multi-million dollar or $1 billion enterprise? Do you see those kind of communities shaping into an enterprise? Because I don't see a lot of startups or businesses targeting such thing worldwide. I mean, there are communities in different regions across the globe, but I don't see a particular enterprise, for example, which is facilitating this across.
You mean the networks itself as a business?
Yeah, I mean, can it be converted into a business like a network of women?
I think it depends, right? Because a lot of the networks are done, I think, almost on a sort of voluntary basis because women want to meet each other and contribute.
Yes.
And then there are some that are managing to monetize it through conferences, through events, through reports. So I
Hmm.
think it's sort of not the network in and of itself often that becomes the business model, but rather the events and the outputs that sort of sit on top of it.
Yeah. But do you think it can be a fundable business where so many investors can join hands together to really rise up the valuation of it? Because, I mean, unless someone invests into that, it's not like valued at a very big amount. It's
Mm.
only a sustainable network and an event based company, then, of sorts.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe this is something that the network should come together and figure out how to do it, or how to self-fund it as well, right? Because not
Yes.
everything needs to be VC funded. One of the things that we did with our microfund specifically is that it's a cooperative. So you buy a share in the cooperative, and with that share, you get a vote. And each company that we invest in, you vote on whether it's a yes or no vote, whether we should invest in this company. So it really
Okay.
is a community of people coming together to
Yeah.
make these decisions and make these investments. So I think, given that you have the community, and it's the
Mhm.
same principle with Corrales, right, where it was a community of
Yes.
women coming together,
Mm.
pooling their money to actually support female entrepreneurs. So maybe there's something in that.
Yeah, there are so many opportunities that can just open a floodgate of things that we didn't even envisage. And it is something to think about because it's also a part of impact, right? Because if that happens, it will create a massive impact for women in the world.
Yeah, definitely. And
Yeah.
I think there are more and more of these networks that are coming up and that are growing as well, right? So it's really beautiful to see. And I think you're right. Yeah, the bigger you can make them, and the more
Yeah.
sort of female power you can bring together, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Because I've seen networks in the UK also. They're just UK centric. So I'm like, how can women then connect with across women across the globe. I mean, you're just restricting them to their own local region, which anyways they could reach through via someone. So I mean, how do you really make someone from UK reach out to someone in Australia just with a click, maybe,
Yeah.
for example?
Yeah.
And with that trust that, okay, you will get a response, because on LinkedIn it really doesn't happen. I mean, you just drop your message and you wait for years to get the reply, and it doesn't come.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that we do with Impact Shakers a lot is collaborations, right? We have over 200 ecosystem partners. And so, for
Yeah.
example, when we organized our first summit earlier this year,
Yeah.
we had over 50 impact investors and I think it was 100 or so accelerators, programs, etc., that all recommended their startups for the summit. So it was, for me, this was one of the examples that I've seen where really the community came together in lots of different ways. And we
Yeah.
had amazing. We had over 400 applications from diverse-led impact businesses in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
We had over 800 meetings that happened in the space of one day. Every startup we've talked to since the summit has gone away with 5, 6, 7, 8 follow-on conversations with potential investors. So it was, and we are really big on collaboration, right? Because there's no point competing at this stage. If there is 1% going in female, 1% of VC money going into female-founded companies and 1% into ethnically diverse founders, then I mean there is so much opportunity. There's no need to compete. So definitely I think collaboration is the way, also between networks.
Yeah, and tell me more about this summit. It's very interesting to know, how did that concept come into the picture? How old is the summit?
So the summit was the first one that we actually did. We had in the end over 400 people there on the day. It was a one-day event in Brussels, and we had just a beautiful mix of investors, startups, ecosystem builders, academics, policymakers. So all of the different players in the ecosystem coming together, and it was a physically and mentally diverse group of people in every way. And it was just so beautiful, because we do this work and sometimes it's sort of easy to forget why we're doing it. And it was almost a physical manifestation of what the economy and what an impact economy could look like if you bring all these people together. And as you can tell from all of these follow-on meetings and the potential investments and all of that, people really embraced it, right? They took it and they really embraced it to lift each other up, and ultimately that's what we were trying to do. So for us it was an amazing experience, and hopefully not the last summit.
Yeah, of course, there are so many more to come, and hopefully I will also attend the next one if you invite me.
You'll definitely get an invite. Yes.
Yes. But tell me, how was it difficult as a first timer to gather so much of crowd, because doing it for the first time with 400 plus people under one roof, it's like a challenge, and I'm sure the collaboration here has helped you a lot. So if you could tell us, how did you really channelize it, because there are so many people who are our listeners as well, who are into different community buildings, and they would want to do events in their own domains. So I would want to know your experience of starting this from scratch, like right from the ideation. How did you put it on paper? Okay, this all needs to be done, and then get it done on the day of the event.
Yeah, so there was a lot of like I said, tapping into the ecosystem that we built over the past years and years and years, right? So it was sort of the group of people that we wanted to invite and we wanted to be there were ready and wanted to do something with us. So there's a lot of sort of unintended prep, if you want, that went into it. But then also for the panels, we actually thought about, how can we dive into some of these topics that come up around diversity, around funding, around alternative financing ideas? How can we dive a little bit deeper, and how can we bring together people that bring different points of views? Because what I find quite often with these conferences is that it almost feels like it's the same conversation over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Because you have the same people having the same conversation, and it's quite often, if you just manage to bring in one startup or one policymaker or just someone who has one woman, someone who has a slightly different view, it all of a sudden becomes a very different conversation. And so this is what we try to do for all of our content as well, to basically bring together people that had different backgrounds and different perspectives to just create a different type of dynamic and a different type of conversation, and then also involve the audience obviously as much as possible, because we have 400 brilliant people there on the day. So actually tapping into them and their expertise as well was just something that worked out really beautifully.
Wow. And just very curious to know, it's an elementary question, but what kind of collaborations did you all look out for? Like, why would someone collaborate with Impact Shakers, for example, for the summit? What was there on the table for them?
So different groups of people, right? Ecosystem builders, because we are helping each other build the ecosystem, and we all need all the help we can get. Impact investors, because we did a big pitching competition, so we also shared a long list of startups that we thought were interesting with them. So a lot of deal flow sharing. Co-investment. We actually did 2 investments through our Microfund on the back of the summit. One of which was 2 other impact funds. So a lot of trying to build these relationships, to co-invest, to write bigger checks, to support these businesses together. So lots of different motivations for people, but for us fundamentally it was about really catalyzing how much capital we can get into diverse-led impact businesses.
Understood. Got it. And I'm sure that, Impact Shakers has been in the game for a longer time. So the quality of deals that you get are good enough. But is it possible to tell me, like, how is it when you initially started? Because I was speaking to Deborah from GSV Ventures. I don't know if you've heard of her. They're an edtech fund based out of the US in Silicon Valley. And they were telling me that for 10 years, all they did was just the summit, just to get their brand name out and let people know that they have some value to add. And after that, level of hard work, that they started getting good deals, because before that nobody would really give them the deal flow, or really the startups wouldn't come to them for funding, because they would think that who are they, why should we give our time to them? So it was through the event that they spread their name out. So how was it for you at Impact Shakers?
Interesting, yeah. So I think a bit of a different journey, because one of the things that we do as well. So Impact Shakers started out doing programs, right? Incubation, acceleration, venture studio type programs, fundraising programs. So really working with startups very closely to help them on this journey. So there were a lot of connections and a lot of deal flow that came that way. Like I said, there's a lot of sharing through partners as well. So even if we might not come across the next amazing deal, one of our partners might, and they might give us a call and say, hey, we have this, this is really interesting, let's look at it together. And I think because we are so specific in that we invest in diverse founders who are building impact businesses, we get a lot of inbound as well, right? Because it's harder for diverse founders to raise. So they're looking out for investors that they know will look at these kind of deals. And I think there is a bit of for a long time, and I think it's still there, a bit of a misconception as well on a good founder or a good business, right? Because a lot of this role model or this idea of a good business that we have is modeled on the Silicon Valley bros. And that might not necessarily be the best way to build a business for the future, right? So it's also thinking and working with the entrepreneurs a little bit to figure out what they need, what they're actually trying to say. If you're working with a female entrepreneur and you look at financial projections, as a rule of thumb, you can double them. If you're working with a male entrepreneur, as a rule of thumb, you can halve them. So it's sort of, trying to figure out some of these nuances as well, and how to what people will say and what you actually hear, and trying to overcome some of these biases and stereotypes, and then also just doing a bit of coaching with the businesses and working. We always build relationships, right? Because ultimately, if we invest in a business, we're stuck with each other for a long time. We're talking years, right? So we want them to want to work with us, and we want us to want to work with them. So as a minimum, I think that the shortest we knew a business before we invested was about 6 months, where we actually really got to know each other. And we've had many occasions as well where we said, look, we don't think that actually taking VC money is the right choice for you. So it's having these relationships where you can also have honest conversations, right? So I think it's, you asked how the deal flow has evolved, but I think it's sort of also evolving how you look at deal flow, especially if you're talking about diverse founders, right? To decide what's good and what's not good. And then also giving the ones that maybe are not quite there yet a chance to evolve over time, giving them honest feedback, and just treating each other with respect like humans over time, that I think helps overcome some of this as well.
Yeah, I know. It's such a transactional world that it's so good that you raised a point that we need to treat each other like humans at the end of it, and not robots who are supposed to give their deliverables on time.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when building a startup is hard work and it's stressful, right? And I think any exited founder that you will speak to will tell you at least some horror stories of how they suffered throughout the whole process. So it's trying to figure out ways as well how we can make the process a bit less painful, and how we can support the founders when the going gets tough as well. So it's, I think the human aspect is really important.
Yeah, that's right. But you said that, finding a good founder is also a tough gig. But tell me, what qualities do you look at in a founder before you put the weight of impact shakers behind them?
So many different things. We love working with founders who have some sort of lived experience, or are working or coming from a community that they're solving a problem for. I'll give you one example. One of the investments we made is Sila Health, and it's basically two Zimbabwean diaspora founders living in the Netherlands who developed an AI chatbot who can do the initial health diagnostics in 13 different African languages in Zimbabwe and Nigeria now. And it's the cultural sensitivity that these founders have from knowing the community goes to the extent that, for example, they trained the AI to understand the nuances in language, in the different languages that the AI speaks. So if in a certain language you say, I feel sick, but actually that means that your stomach hurts, the AI will pick up these nuances. And another example is, in the beginning, they noticed that if the money for healthcare often gets paid by relatives, right? And if they built in a remittance service that the relatives could pay the doctors directly, because if they sent the money to the family, they ended up not going to the doctor a lot of the time. So it's sort of understanding these nuances and how the community works that I think you really get from investing in founders that solve for communities that they know very well, right? Quite often, especially when you look at diverse founders, they often have very, very impressive backgrounds in terms of, their education, the dedication, their love, and their fire that they just have for the problem that they're solving. So I think there is a lot in that, definitely.
Yeah, but do you think if someone doesn't have a fancy degree or a great education, they can still be impressive with just what they're building?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think sometimes it's even sort of even the other way around, because you get a lot of founders that will have been on all of the lists, the 30 under 30 and the top 100 and the top this and the top that, right? So some of that happens over time, and I'm sure a lot of it is well deserved. But I think you can find some amazing founders who haven't had that exposure, that spotlight. That really, like I said, that know the community, they know the problem that they're solving, they know the market that they're solving for, and they just have this dedication to the problem and the solution. That is independent from whether they have a fancy degree or not.
Yeah, that's right. And what are some of the red flags that you have commonly observed in the founders?
Red flags. One of the things that we really struggle with is when people are not willing to build a relationship. Because you do get this as well, where you sort of, you're the walking wallet, and it's sort of, I'm closing my round in a week, here's the deck, invest now. So that's something that tends to, it's not necessarily a red flag, but tends to not work with us. Then there is a lot of impact and greenwashing going on as well, obviously. So because it's become a bit of a a bit of a trend, right?
Yes.
So there are some people that are building a business because they think it's a good time to build a business in X, and that don't really deeply care about the problem they're solving. And so when the going gets tough, that's probably a problematic setup or problematic sort of situation, right?
Yes.
So that's one of the things. a lot of people that will reach out to us, and we are very explicit that we only invest in a diverse team, that will reach out to us with 3 white dudes, and say they hired a black woman as the intern, and that's their diversity. So that's another one where it's sort of, not all diversity is visible. So sometimes we always have the conversation, right? And we ask people why they think they fit. They fit this criteria, but you get some very wild explanations.
My God, this is really crazy. How can they just say that, okay, I have a black intern and I'm diverse? She's not even a full-time part of your business.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that we look out for as well, right? That the team that we invest in actually have a stake in the business and have the ability to make decisions and contribute to the decision making.
Yeah. And what makes a good pitch for you? Like, what would you want to hear in the first 5 minutes of a founder speaking? Because some people just come and speak as if they're reading a script, and it just takes your attention away from the main agenda. So, and someone told me, actually, Rumi was only saying that if you know the agenda, you can control the room. And that is that one learning that she's taken for life. So I want to know, how is it that you evaluate pitches, and what would you want to hear out of a founder in that?
So I love when founders have really thought about and really engaged with the market and the customers, and have proof points. And that could be at the early stage. This could be surveys, right? This could be research. It could be conversations that they had with companies that could become customers at some point. So it's founders that get creative in how to build the case and actually validate their idea and their product, and that work with the customers along the way in building it. So that's something that's I think really distinctive. And you quite often, if you look at a market slide for a startup, for example, quite often you will see that as someone Googled for 5 minutes and then put down something, and it's not the right market, and it's not really a fit with the product that they're selling or the service, and it's sort of like, it's very obvious very quickly that they haven't actually done the work and really understood the market and the problem that they're solving. The other thing is someone who can clearly articulate what the problem and the solution are. Because if it takes you 10 minutes to explain the problem, you probably haven't understood the problem properly yet.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, like the hardest thing to do is to explain something really complex in really simple terms in a few sentences. So it's really that, and that really makes people stand apart. And then I mean, anyone who does enough pitch practice will get decent at pitching, right? So it's the sort of, in terms of the performance, you can practice that and you will get better over time. But in terms of what you're pitching and the understanding of the problem and the customers and the market and how you fit in, that really sets them apart.
Right. But do you think that the way women pitch, especially, it's very different from the way men do when it comes to articulation?
I don't know. I don't look at that many pitches from my dudes, so I maybe don't have a big enough repertoire to compare it to. But I think no, because a lot of the women that pitch to us solve problems that they are immensely passionate about, and have spent an enormous amount of time understanding and digging into and fine-tuning the solutions to. So I wouldn't say that as a rule it's different. Yes, you get some quite often when you get to sort of let's say the standard pitch events. I went to one in Germany recently. And I walked into the cloakroom and there were 2 female coats and everything else was black and dark blue male coats. And so it's like, okay, I know where I am. And the pitches were very boastful and very high level. And so for me, that just doesn't do it for me, right? So I think in a way, maybe because women and diverse founders need to know that they need to prove themselves when they do the pitching and they come to us. Quite often they're just phenomenal.
Yeah. And I have a hypothetical situation for you, because I read this in an article, that how do you pitch someone in a VC tech conference if you've just met them and you just have like a couple of seconds with them? So what would you really say? Like, you have an elevator pitch where you still have a couple of more seconds. But when you meet someone in a conference, you really don't know whether you would just get 5 seconds or 5 minutes. So, what really does make or break for a conversation in this kind of a setting for you if you're approached by a founder in a conference?
If I'm approached by a founder in the conference, the thing that will probably work best will be to establish a personal relationship first. And if you have 2 minutes to talk to me, then it should probably be 2 minutes to get to know each other a little bit. Because like I said earlier, right, this is about building a long-term relationship. And yes, I want to know what you're doing. But if you go in and just roll off your elevator pitch that you've told 200 people just before me, I'm not going to feel like we have, like, there is something, right? So I think it's that human need to feel some sort of connection as well. That really makes a difference. And so it's often the people that I connected with on some sort of human level that I then will want to have another conversation with, right? So I think this is probably, if you don't have enough time to explain your business, this might be a thing to do.
But let me put you on the other side. I mean, I'm sure that you also might be meeting some mind-blowing founders whom you would want to invest into. And when you meet them, I'm sure, like you said, you establish a human level connection first in your first conversation. So what are the kind of things that you guys speak on? I'm just trying to dig into your life a little bit to know more about how you conduct these things, because it's very basic, elementary, but something that people really don't know what to do about and how to conduct themselves in these situations. So just try to ask from that perspective.
Yeah, it's the things that we've been talking about, right? The idea that you can use entrepreneurship as a tool for solving important societal and planetary challenges. The idea that we can do this together as humans, and you are not a commodity. And so actually, when we work with someone, we want to work with the person and we want to treat them as a person. It's those kind of things. It's the idea that we want to democratize who can call themselves an investor, because if we only have one profile writing the checks, it's probably pretty likely that we only get one profile that gets the checks, right? So the more diverse the profiles that are writing checks, and this is early stage angel investors, this is alternative investment vehicles like the Microfund that we set up, the more diverse this investor pool becomes, the more diverse the companies that get the funding as well, because we all invest in the people that look like us and that solve our problems and, that speak the same language on some level. So it's the idea that we can make this all a little bit more human, a bit more inclusive, and actually build something that is meaningful beyond financial returns.
Yeah, but is it like if you were speaking to a founder for the first time, would you just speak to them of their idea as a starting point or something else? Because you said that if a founder approaches an investor like you in a conference, it might not be a good idea to just speak about the idea. But I don't know how it is from the other way around when an investor is approaching a founder.
Yeah, usually there is some sort of context, right? A panel that you've just listened to, or an interesting idea that you've heard somewhere. So I think that's a good conversation starter. And then actually just acknowledging the situation sometimes can be helpful as well. So I had it in reverse, where I went to a conference with LPs, so investors that invest in funds, and it was sort of me pitching to them, right? And actually, the best conversations I had were the conversations where I said, "Look, I know you have been bombarded all day long by people who want you to invest in their funds. So let's just go grab a coffee and take a breath." So it's that, but it's like having the courage to not do what everyone else is doing, in a sense, right? And to actually take a step back and say, look, I know this is probably, I'm not going to do this to you because this probably feels really shitty for you as well. So what can we do to make this a slightly different experience?
Yeah. Wow, that's actually a good line to say. Usually, you have boyfriends and girlfriends reading about pickup lines for their dates. I think VCs and investors, founders, everyone need to know their pickup lines also for
Yeah,
getting meetings.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
equally tough.
I think the difference is that I actually, when I say it, I mean it. So don't say stuff that you don't mean, right? Because I think most people are emotionally intelligent enough to look right
Yeah,
through this. And I mean, look, we've met startups and we've met investors as well that don't want to talk about personal stuff, right? They want to get straight down to business. They want it to be transaction, and that's
correct.
that. Um,
Yeah,
and they're probably not the people that we're going to end up
okay.
working with or co-investing with, but that
Yeah,
also exists. So what I'm giving
yeah.
here is just one. It's just one perspective.
Yeah, but how do you face rejection? Because, like you said, you might just go and talk to someone and they'll be like, let's get to the point. I mean, I'm sure that must have happened at some point in life, if not now. So, how do you face those kind of rejections or rejections in general from founders who might not want funds from your fund?
Yeah, constantly, huh? Like we get 99% rejections and 1% yeses in lots of different ways, and I think it's the same for founders. So
Hmm.
there's definitely a lot of personal work to be done to not let all of them get to you, right?
Yeah,
Because a lot of the time the rejections are not because we don't believe in the founder or we don't believe in the business or the space. It's there can be so many reasons, right? It could be the wrong timing, it could be the wrong check size, it could be whatever it is, the wrong region, the wrong, so there are so many objective reasons that don't have anything to do with the business that you're building,
yeah,
the investments that you're making. That it's so I think that's easier said than done, because it's really hard when people tell you no.
yeah,
Quite often it's that, and one of the things that we try to do is give some level of feedback, so that actually, and quite honest feedback as well, so that people can actually, if they want, take the feedback
yeah.
and do something with it. Because if you
Mhm.
just keep saying no, and I think this goes for angels as well, I love when angels give some sort of feedback for why it's not for them, right?
Yeah,
See, uh, paying some respect to the founder for the effort they have put in,
yeah.
if they have put in the effort, and actually saying, look, this is not for me because XYZ, but I think you should speak to this person.
Mm.
It's those kind of, again, trying to be helpful even when you have to say no.
Yeah.
And I think for founders, it's also asking for the feedback, right? Saying, why is this not a fit? If you think, based on everything that you've researched and that you know about the investor, you think actually it should be or it might be.
Yeah. But like we spoke about how physical connections can be made, I'm sure like y'all are bombarded with thousands of cold emails every day where a startup founder is trying to pitch their ideas. So do you remember a unique cold pitch which really grabbed your attention just because the way it was written was extremely different from the way others write?
There was a couple of ladies who were doing a milk alternative who sent a very cute video.
Okay.
That one again, it wasn't a fit, but that really stood out. And
Wow.
then I just really respond well to founders that have done the research, that say, look, I know you invest in this type of profile. I know you have invested in this type of business, and we think we are in a similar space.
Mm.
I know that you look for diverse founders building impact businesses, and here's why we are a good fit, right? So
Yeah.
it's the people that have actually put in the effort to treat me like an individual, like a person,
Yeah.
rather than me being part of the 500 people that got the cold email.
But that's right. But cool. Thank you so much for your time and your support. I'm just very much grateful that I got to speak to you.